Chadwick Moore, people. Columnist, journalist, author. And this is not all going to be about Tucker, by the way. I don't know if Chadwick knows this. This is actually going to be a lot about Chadwick. Okay, Chadwick, you're good? You can hear me? All right, I'm bringing you in 3, 2, 1. Sir, how goes the battle?
Hey, it's going great. Thanks for having me on. Great to be with you.
Thank you I love it. First of all, thank you for coming short notice and accommodating. I mean, it's like, I like not having a schedule better because it's very easy to be flexible, but some people, thank you for coming on such short notice.
No, I appreciate that about you. I thought, well, this is going to be really fun. I like this guy already. And thank you so much, by the way, for, tweeting about the book and all that. I mean, that really means a lot to me. It's really, really nice
incredible. But it's incredible. But I'm telling you now, we're going to get into everything else but the book. Not everything else, but we're going to get into the book a bit. First of all, your name is, I can't help in my head say it I can't not say it with a British accent. It's possibly the coolest name I've ever heard. You're born and raised in Tennessee?
Right. Yes. Yeah. I was born in Tennessee. So the British accent thing is funny because I used to live in London, and when I say my name's Chadwick, everyone's like, that's so American. And here people are like, that's so British. It is in fact a very American name. It's a very, very Southern working class name, which is kind of in line with like a lot of poor Southerners would give their children names that they thought sounded, I'm not saying that historically, maybe not necessarily my parents, but that they thought sounded sort of highfalutin. So like Chadwick, so that's really the where the name comes from. If you ever meet another Chadwick, he's probably Southern, and it's also a very common black name, contrary to it sounding like, I'm from Connecticut. I'm not.
That's an interesting explanation for the name.
Yes.
I can tell you, I've met a Chad in my life, but I doubt it was short for Chadwick, given my cultural upbringing, or not very many Jewish kids with the name Chadwick that I've ever met in Montreal. So born and raised Tennessee. I won't go too far into your childhood. I don't know how much you like talking about this, but how many siblings and what got you into doing what you're doing?
So I just have an older sister. She's, one of my best friends in the whole world. She's awesome. She lives in Florida now. And what got me into it was, I went to school for, I always loved English. And so I went to school. I double majored in English and journalism, and then also had studied creative writing. And, I at first wanted to be a fiction writer. And, I found that I was actually enjoying my nonfiction classes a lot more, and then got out of school and, moved immediately to New York and was kind of, working in restaurants, things like that, landed some gigs at a publishing company and still trying to write fiction, but then kind of stumbled into journalism and got my first story published in the New York Times, actually, when I was in my early 20s. And, I just started realizing that, the world is so much more interesting. Writing about the real world is so much more interesting than making up your own world. And since then, I've, been in journalism. I was working in liberal media for magazines and newspapers. And then, was abruptly canceled and fired from all my jobs after Trump was elected president, and publicly came out and said that, I don't hate him, and I'm actually right-leaning politically.
Well, that's what we're going to get into. So the column that I won't say put you on the map, but the one that got you some notoriety that got Tucker Carlson's attention was coming out as a conservative.
Yeah, that's right. That was in February 2017 in the New York Post. And I basically, I never was public about my political beliefs because, naively, I thought a journalist shouldn't, it was unprofessional to do that. But, after Trump was elected, I saw everyone around me, including all my own colleagues and my bosses and editors, were all just totally losing their minds on social media. And my final, the year leading up to that, I was kind of thrown into the political world. A lot of my writing was not overtly political at all. I was not interested in it. I was more interested in human stories. I was doing profiles, investigative stories, features, human interest stuff. And I still love that stuff. And, but the year before in 2016, I was sent to Orlando to report on the Pulse nightclub massacre. And then that became kind of politically charged. And then I was sent to profile Milo Yiannopoulos, who was, at the height of his powers then. And then, after everyone was sort of losing their minds after all this stuff, I just decided I got to say something, even if, I'm like a nobody, but I just felt like, anyone who might be listening or care, I don't want them to think that I'm like these people. So I, wrote this column for the New York Post, and the headline was, I'm a gay New Yorker and I'm coming out conservative. And I didn't think anyone would really read it. I was just like, in fact, I thought it was kind of amusing. So I thought the article was so innocent. It was just sort of me being like, I believe in free speech. And I think like the left kind of lies. And then it went totally viral. And that was how I got acquainted with Tucker, because his team asked me to appear on, I think the article ran on a Saturday, and then on Tuesday they asked me to come on his show and talk about it, and talk about the reaction.
We're going to get into the reaction, because it's got to be so amazing to write an article, to come out and say, I'm coming out as a conservative. You had already come out as gay before that, I guess?
Oh, when I was like 15. So
okay,
yeah.
So you're coming out, you're saying, I'm coming out as a conservative, and lo and behold, and now the conservatives are sitting there saying, gay or not, welcome to the club. Like, ideologically, we are tolerant. Now we get to show that we're not the bigots. And the other people come out and say, holy crap, he came out as conservative, excommunicate him. Was that the immediate response that you got from the left versus the right?
Oh, absolutely. Completely. I mean, it was amazing because like, I didn't like travel in like Republican circles at all. Like, where I'm from, like, of course I knew tons of conservatives. I never hated them or anything. I never thought they were evil bigots or anything like that, but my whole world was, I live in New York City. My whole world is, liberal, creative types, intelligentsia, academic types. And, the smart people, the tolerant, smart people. And, when that happened, it was like, I had like thousands of emails and all these messages on Twitter, and like I never even really used Twitter at the time, and it was all of these these people just like, welcome to the party, and all this love and everything. I'm like, this is sort of amazing. And at the meantime, I was getting a couple of days later, actually like right after I appeared on Tucker, the very next day, fired from my job as editor-at-large for Out Magazine and The Advocate, which are the two big gay magazines. I guess now they're probably trans magazines, but at the time they were gay magazines. And fired from my job. I was writing for the New York Times at the time also, blacklisted from them. And, totally like lost 100% of my friends, like every single one of them, which was sort of amazing. But yeah, it was like the love fest coming from the right, and like, welcome to the party. And then from the left, it was, of course, the intolerance, hatred, and vilification that characterizes them, despite what they want to say.
I once ironically said in response to someone's tweet on Twitter, more evidence of the loving, tolerant left, and then the person replied to me and said, only the right calls us that, and I was like, thank you for proving my point, you dumbass. Yeah. And they said they only call us that to make fun of us. Like, oh, thank you for missing the point and proving my point.
Right, exactly.
Back it up a little bit, actually. None of this personal, life is none of my business, but I like to ask a lot of questions about it. You say you came out at 15, but you presumably knew beforehand. You're growing up in Tennessee, which, if American movies teaches me anything, might not be the most stereotyping, might not be the most place where you'd want to come out as being gay in the first place. Growing up, conservative household, religious household, were your parents before and after the coming out, were they equally tolerant? Did it shock them? Did they care? What's it like growing up in Tennessee? And, subsidiarily, are all the stereotypes that we think we know on the coasts from movies inaccurate stereotypes of the heartland?
Oh, right. Completely. Well, so at that time when I was 15, we'd moved to Illinois, but downstate Illinois. So very, very red, basically Southern, and, not Chicago, Illinois. And, it was, so my household was, my parents divorced that same year, but my mom's like lifelong Democrat. My dad's lifelong Republican. Weirdly enough, my dad was kind of like way more chill about it. I mean, they're both great. Like, they both love me, and they've always been super supportive, but, it's funny because he, my mom was like, her immediate response was like, well, I just donated money to the Human Rights Campaign, which is kind of sweet. Today I absolutely hate that organization, but she was just trying to make a gesture. And my dad's response was something along the lines of, he's like this, big tough guy, played football, and, he's a farmer and he hunts and all this stuff. And, I was most like afraid for him to find out, because, he's a conservative. And, my sister had told him before, I did. And so it was when he was driving me to college my freshman year. And he said, he was like, well, your sister told me something about you. And I was like, oh God, here we go. And he said, she told me that you're gay. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, I guess I'm going to have to tell her boyfriends what I tell your boyfriends. If you hurt my effing son, I'm going to cut your balls off. And I was like, that's like the sweetest thing you could possibly say. That's great. So,
That's
it was
fantastic.
wonderful. Like, I mean, this was, so I'm 40 years old now. So whatever year this was, even in red middle America, I was like totally celebrated. I came out in high school and, fast forward to being 33 years old in New York City and coming out as conservative, and you're completely vilified and ostracized.
It's first of all, that anecdote is amazing. It's going to be in a movie if it hasn't already been in one. Um, and so you go to New York and you start working as a journalist in the deepest of deep blues. When you start off in journalism, what year is it, give or take?
Well, let's see. I moved here in 2005, and I mean, I think I had my first story published in like 2008 or nine, maybe. But I was like, I don't come from money or anything, and I didn't go to an Ivy League school, and so for a huge part of my life, it was, I was freelancing for the New York Times. I was writing these stories, but at the same time, I was working in restaurants on the side. I was working in a tea factory at one point, packaging tea. I was like kind of doing anything to scrape by and also like be a writer, and try to make it. But, writing was absolutely not paying the bills. I think probably by the time I was 30, I was mostly writing full time, like late 20s. And then I guess still even doing side jobs. But, I immediately, as soon as I got here, like I was working in a restaurant, but like hustling, trying to meet people, sending out, just blind pitching editors, and then kind of got that break with that first story in the Times. But still, it was like, a long slog. I mean, it takes a long time, I think, before if you aren't fed into somewhere like the New York Times because you went to Columbia or Harvard or Yale, then it takes a really long time to do that hustle and get your footing. I mean, that's one thing I learned that I wish I would have learned. One thing I found out on my own that I wish I would have learned in journalism school was the nepotism that's in this industry, and how, if I were to go back and teach at my alma mater, I'd be like, none of you have a chance in hell unless you have a recognizable last name, if you want to work it like for the big boys. So, that was, I wouldn't change a second of it. I mean, it was a wonderful experience, but, man, it was, looking back, it was hard.
Well, that's it. And do you remember the moment where it was when you got your first contract of a job where it became self-sustainable, where you didn't have to bust the side gigs in order to do what you love?
Yeah, that was, and even then, there's not like a lot of money. You still have like roommates and you're still like, hustling. But yeah, it was probably, I don't even know what year that would have been, like in my late 20s or something when I got contracted out in the Advocate. So at least I had like a stable thing, and I'm doing what I love. I mean, like I never really cared about like gay whatever. Like I just don't care. But it was cool because it was a wonderful life because I could just travel anywhere and do anything I wanted. I had so much freedom to write anything I wanted. And these were, long magazine pieces. And all I have to do is just like find some gay angle. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. I want to go to LA. What's some like gay angle in some story I can write there? So it was a cool experience. Great. And even though like, that's not really my forte, like gay media, I was still like extremely grateful to have it. And at the same time, I could freelance for other places like the Times and Playboy and some other places where I worked for.
Well, actually, we're going to get into the firing because that I have many questions on. But before we even get there, when is it? You talked about the Pulse shooting. And in retrospect now, I mean, I was sort of more aware at the time, but the framing of the Pulse shooting was wildly different than the reality of the Pulse shooting, as is the case oftentimes with a lot of these stories. The initial narrative, either deliberately or accidentally, covers up the true story behind it, which might not be quite as favorable to the initial narrative. That one started off as an outright hate crime against the gay community, a shooting at a gay club. And then there was a bit more of nuance to it when the shooter became known, and the shooters, I think, I'm not misremembering that the shooter had some, was part of the community, had some internal demons, had gone to this place, and it was not as clearly a far-right attack on the gay community as initially reported. I'm not misremembering anything about that story, am I?
Well, so even at the time I didn't know this. When I was reporting on it, I remember my editors were like trying to push this anti-gun narrative in my reporting. And I was like, I think this is like a terrorist attack. I think it's radical Islam. I don't think guns are the issues. Like, no. I think we really need to talk about guns. And, I'm just like, no, I'm not doing that. What we know now, and I only found this out a couple years ago, was that the club wasn't targeted because it was gay. In fact, he didn't even know it was a gay bar. He just wanted to target a nightclub. He tried to go to one nightclub before and like determined it would be a bad target, and then just found this one. So now we know that. I mean, at the time there were rumors that he'd like had some affairs with people. I don't know if they were true or not. I remember sort of reporting on them, like same-sex rumors. But what we knew from the trial of his wife, I think what we found out was that it was an Islamic terrorist attack against the West, and he was just wanted to target a nightclub. So that's what we know now.
Now, we don't need to get into the depths of that story, but it's interesting. You say is it your editor? Is the word the editor in chief who says this is the angle, go with it, and you say no?
Yeah, well, you're sort of like, because I was doing the cover story for one of the magazines, and I was doing lots of stuff for the website, and you're talking to your editor and stuff, and you're saying this is what I did today and found out, and you're just kind of like working through a story. And I just remember him sort of bringing up guns a lot, and I was talking more about terrorism, Islamic terrorism. And he's like, well, maybe you need to look more into the gun issue. And I'm like, well, maybe if more people had guns in that club, then this would have ended very differently. But when I was there, I mean, it was heartbreaking being there. It was the first time I was kind of thrown into that kind of breaking news. And I was, on a plane, like the very next morning after it happened. And like, oh man, it affected me so much because I was hearing these stories and talking to these people who were inside the club, and people were watching their friends and boyfriends get gunned down in front of them. And it was just like really, really heartbreaking. And then to sort of see the level at which the story was being twisted by a lot of people in media was, another eye-opening experience of many I'd had along the way of just like, I think the media is lying about stuff, or I think they have an agenda. I don't think there's,
that was where I was getting with this. Was the Pulse, was that story the first time you really started to discover it, or had you noticed this framing sort of dishonest spin that we now know as modus operandi? Was that the first time you started seeing it, or did you start seeing it a little earlier on?
The biggest moment when I really started seeing it was in late 2013, November 2013. I went to Russia to write a story about gay rights in Russia, because it was a huge story at the time, because Russia was getting ready to host the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. And that whole summer, there've been all these stories about like how, Vladimir Putin's like sending gays to concentration camps. And I'm like, well, this is fascinating. I want to go and be on the ground, because none of these reporters for the New York Times or the New Yorker or anywhere are actually in Russia, and none of them are gay. So like, I want to go there and like see what the hell's going on. So I finally got permission for months of pestering my editor to send me to Russia. And that was the first time that because at the time I was so naive, and like I really respected a lot of mainstream media, and I really was aspiring to that. And I felt that these people were smart and being honest. And when I got there, I just realized that like none of the things they were talking about were happening. Even like so-called gay rights activists, which isn't really a thing in Russia, when I was talking to them, at least at the time it wasn't, probably still isn't, they were even laughing at the West coverage. And they were like, I was only there for maybe 2 weeks, but
that's a long, 2 weeks is a long time.
It was a decent amount of time, yeah.
If it's an existential risk to your life when you're there. I remember one of the stories, there was a bunch of topless ladies who were protesting. They got locked up. And I think that had to do with the same. So you get down there, and what you see on the ground in Russia is nothing like what the media is saying it is out in the West.
Absolutely. And it was a bigger, like, I just realized how, at first, the age-old question, is it stupidity or is it, are they being sinister?
Malice, yeah.
Yeah. And I just sort of realized, even only being there for like 2 weeks, that anyone writing about Russia and the West, especially about this issue, had zero cultural context. Like it's like they were writing about, New Jersey, and like, you're writing about an Eastern country with like a very complicated history and past, and an extremely different culture from anywhere in the West. So you can't, number one, you can't view them through this lens of like civil rights, and you can't, and like, there at one point there was some photo that anytime they did a story about gay rights in Russia, there's this photo of this man who was like, he was on the ground bleeding, and there was cops standing over him and a rainbow flag behind him. And the implication was he'd gotten beaten up by the police for being gay. And even gay rights activists who were all Western, who I was talking to there, were like, yeah, that guy's not even gay. He's not even Russian. And he punched the cop first. And like, we know him, it's like that photo. And like, these are people who, are probably super liberal, were saying this to me. So it was just like looking at this lens. I'm like, wait, this country, if you wanted to talk about something like gay rights, which is so foreign to any Russian, like, you have to look at it through a lens of like America in 1950. And like, no one's being like locked up and sent to camps, but also it's just so foreign to them, the whole concept of it. And it's just viewed as, homosexuality is just viewed as this bourgeois Western thing that, just does not apply to Russia. Now, of course, there are, gay people and gay clubs in Russia, etc. But it was just sort of that, going back and reading these like Western credentialed journalists from the New Yorker, New York Times writing with authority on this. And I'm like, yeah, but you haven't been there. And like, I'm hanging out with these people, and I'm hanging out with the owner of the largest gay club in Moscow. And like, I'm getting like this big cultural lens. And that's sort of the story I wrote, was just this, this how to view Russia through this context. And I think it was received pretty well, but that was the first time that like, I really was like, wait a minute, these people who I think are so much smarter than me and so much better than me and have way more credentials than me are absolutely stupid. They have no idea what they're talking about. And, from then on is when I just started looking, and I was very young at the time, but I started looking at the media with a completely different lens. 2015, 2016 comes around, and then that was just full force because they just were no longer trying to hide their lies. And it was just astounding to watch it all unfold.
That was is the expression watershed moment. I may be using that expression wrong. That was my eye-opening moment, was 2016. I still didn't get very vocal about anything for a couple of years because it's still like, even today, I find discussing politics to be irritating because it's always the same crap. It's either it goes in a back and forth tit for tat, or you're discussing with people who are of open mind, and there's very few of them, and generally speaking, they sort of agree on the substantive stuff. 2015, 2016, Trump gets elected, the world goes batshit crazy. When did your article come out in the context of this? Was it 2017?
The New York Post article, yeah, it was February 2017. It was right after the inauguration, because what inspired me was watching the pink hat wearers and watching, Madonna want to blow up the White House and whatever. And I was just like, I cannot anymore. I cannot stay silent. These people are totally insane. So it was watching footage of the inauguration that was the final straw for me.
How does it work? You write the article. Do you submit it to the editor, or do you? You submit it to the New York Post, and they decide to run it. They let you know that they're going to run it, and like D-Day is coming.
So someone at I'd written for the New York Post before, but nothing political. And I think I wrote like some pieces about like houseplants and stuff, like really silly, like home stuff, which I kind of love that stuff. So I'd been like kind of tweeting a little bit or something about my feelings. And he's like, hey, do you want to do a story for the New York Post? And I just thought like, yeah, sure. Why not? And then, so that's how it happened. But I didn't know when it was going to run. And I had, I was never on Twitter. And then, I looked at my phone and I had like, 1 million notifications. I was like, oh, I guess that Post story ran. And then that was that.
It's amazing. It's amazing. You had already been, it wasn't like, it didn't come as a shock because you already knew, I guess you were feeling out call it ideological intolerance from the tolerance side. And you sort of got sensitive to the fact that the other side is not the demon, but the degree to which it exploded still surprised you?
Yeah, because just before that in September, the previous September, I had done this profile of Milo Yiannopoulos, who like I barely knew who he was, but I knew he was like colorful and weird enough and interesting that it would be like a great profile. It wasn't even my idea to write about him. It was my editor's. And I went to London to profile him. And when that story came out, it just like, I had so many people attacking me and attacking the magazine. And I was like, that was really that was the first time I'd been, sort of canceled on the receiving end of the liberal mob. And I was just like totally floored because I'm like, this article was so fair. It wasn't, I treated Milo like in no way different than I would treated anyone. And I profiled like celebrities and stuff before that, like Nick Jonas and people. And I was so shocked by that because I found Milo to be so fascinating. And another example that, I thought I was well prepared when I went in to meet him. And I realized I totally wasn't as soon as he opened his mouth, because everything I was reading about him was from liberal media that was treating him like this sort of idiot and this clown, when I realized this guy is like incredibly smart and really hilarious and really charming. And also, really important at that time. And so that was the first time that the mob came for me. But I was really surprised at how little it bothered me, and I was just sort of like, well, I think all these people are totally wrong. But being sort of outside the bubble and looking in like that, I think prepared me for then what would happen when I decided to just go full scorched earth and say, screw you people, I'm not one of you.
Well, how quickly after the publication of the article do you get fired?
So it was the article was published, and then everyone was silent. And then I was on Tucker that Tuesday. And I think it was the Tucker interview that really did it the very next day, Wednesday, we had an editorial meeting, and I had been working on like a half dozen stories sort of tangentially. And one of the big ones was I was supposed to profile the new, I can't remember his name now, Angelo something, the new head of the ACLU. And so someone in the editorial meeting was like, what about Chadwick's ACLU story? And the editor-in-chief just kind of, we'll talk about that later. And so I was like totally boxed out of the meeting and nobody was talking about my stories. I'm like, oh, I think I know what's going on here. And then that night, my editor called me and just like, we have to let you go. Or, why? And then he said, like, started screaming, like, why could you do this to me? And I'm like, what'd I do? What are you talking about?
Okay, no, hold on. I got to ask a couple of questions. So the editor calls you up at night.
Yeah.
He knows that he's firing you.
Yeah.
Is he crying when he calls you up? Is he laughing? Is he frothing with rage? How long does the conversation last? And then what the heck? Why would you do this to us? You got to elaborate on that.
Yeah. So Aaron Hicklin was his name, and I really liked him. And he's like liberal. He's older than me, maybe like 10 years older than me, maybe a little bit older. But of that generation of liberal that, he's a British guy, like classical liberal. I could always tell, at least in my opinion, he was kind of fed up with like the wokies in the office, like the little woke millennial, or I guess they were millennials at the time who would, whatever. And he always had my back. And when the Milo story came out, he totally had my back. And actually he called me and he said, whoever the parent company was, that magazine gets passed around, like, I don't know, but he called me the night before the Milo article ran. He said, so-and-so wants to pull the article. And I told them that I would quit if they did. So I was like, that's pretty cool. Like, that was awesome. And I knew he was super liberal, but he was an old school journalist who respected good reporting. And so I know he didn't want to fire me. I know it wasn't his decision. And again, like, I really liked him as a person. And it was someone above him, whatever company owned the magazine. I don't even know.
It's interesting. He says in September with the Milo, pulling that article, I'll quit if you do it. But this time around, he doesn't say I'll quit if you make me fire him. It's like nobody stands up and then, or unless he took this one more personally than he took the Milo article. I don't know about that. And so, but is he screaming on the phone? Is he like raising his voice in anger?
Oh, he sounded, well, it's funny. It's just like a couple weeks before that, I had coffee with him and he wanted to meet me for coffee and they were like downsizing. So I thought he was going to fire me. This was like before the New York Post article. And then after the meeting, like I told him that, I said, I thought you were going to get rid of me. And he gave me a hug when we were leaving. And he's like, no, as long as I'm at this magazine, you always have a job here. And cause he like totally loved my writing and that was sweet. So, but apparently not, apparently it was a bridge too far. So in the phone call, he sounded really flustered and upset, and it was very rushed. Well, I'm sorry I have to get rid of you, and I think you know why. And funny enough, I could have sued him.
I think you know what. I guess it's on demand. What do they call it? Not on demand work. Well, they can at will employment, so they can fire you when they want. How long had you been there for?
I started writing for them in probably like 2011 or 2010.
So
maybe?
this is years that you've known them. The better part of a half decade.
Yeah.
No, and the excuse is, why? Not necessarily even the article, but you fraternized with Tucker Carlson.
Right. Yeah. I mean, not only did you come out as conservative, now you're on Fox News of all places. The Death Star that got this horrible man elected president. I think it was probably going on Fox News, and
and that was the first time that you had met Tucker Carlson.
That's right. Yeah. He was. It was remote, so I was at the Fox News studio here in New York, and he was in Washington at the time. But that was my first exposure, my first time on Fox, only my third time on TV, and first time being exposed to him. And like I sort of didn't really, I kind of knew who he was, but not that well. I didn't really know much about him at the time. I was just sort of familiar with his
I do
face.
wonder, like, I don't think even I was that aware at the time that Tucker Carlson was like the red line where if you cross it, you have literally fraternized with the devil.
Right.
So that was the first time and obviously it wasn't the last time because it became the beginning of another decade long relationship. You're on, you tell your story. It's like a 3-minute piece. It's a short hit, as they say in the industry.
Super short hit. Yeah.
And after you get fired, how quickly are you back on with Tucker?
I was back on, I think it was about 2 or 3 months. I think it was that April I was back on for the second time because I had given a speech in Portland, Oregon at Portland State University, and liberals students showed up to protest, and there's video of them acting crazy and deranged. So then I was back on Tucker to talk about that experience. And then from then they just kept calling me and asking me back on just for, my opinion on things happening in the news. And then I was a guest for basically the whole run of the show since then, even on the last episode, April 21st, which we didn't know was going to be the last episode, but I was a guest on that one too.
I mean, when they fire you, I don't know, you say you don't come from money, and I understand that. Do you have money saved up? Are you panicking? What do you do to find work? And how does the next several months of your life look after being spontaneously fired for having come out as conservative?
Oh, I had nothing because, I it didn't make any money, I didn't, and I had no savings whatsoever. And yeah, it was super tough, but I couldn't, let people know that because that would be like they won, So it was, and I write about this in the book. Like I was getting evicted. I like had no money. I had to borrow money from my parents for the first time ever in my life to pay my rent. And it was like, yeah, it was super hard, and I didn't know what the hell I was going to do. But the only thing that kept me going was I know I didn't do anything wrong, and I knew I was right about this. And even if people disagreed with my politics, I knew what I believed, and I would never regret standing up for that. There can be no downside for that, but it was really, really hard for several months. And then I just started getting jobs and sort of laying on my feet, and, I had some people come in and hire me for this or that. And then, it definitely got much better and way better than it ever was before.
Yeah. If someone says, was it the right decision? It says, well, it depends on what point in time you ask me, because net positive after 10 years is not necessarily net positive after 1 year. And not that the net positive is even the motivation behind it, but above and beyond everything else, it tends to, as you say in the book, being honest, tends to work out better, make you a more complete person, and be more fulfilling. And by the way, I should add this. I'm not going to spoil the book. I had known a lot about Tucker Carlson already. Not everything. I learned a few things about Tucker from the book, but what I did like, especially, was infusing your stories into the narrative of Tucker Carlson, because it's interesting. I obviously knew nothing about you before reading the book, or very little, and I like the Tucker childhood stuff. I think I had been familiar with most of it, but some of the anecdotes were fantastic. So you go on, you end up on Tucker. He invites you back periodically. You're building your brand. You're building your base. What are you doing at this point, leading up to how you got into the rights to do the book?
To this book, well, Monica Crowley, who's a wonderful person, set me up with The Spectator. She was good friends with the editor there, and I started writing for them. And I love The Spectator. They're great, and they kind of let me do anything I want. And so that was sort of like a big break for me. And then just I was doing some writing for Breitbart, some other places like that, doing some behind the scenes, editor stuff for other people. And then so we started working on this book about Tucker a year and a half ago, early last spring 2022. And, my publisher called me up, this editor, my editor, Harry Stein. I'd worked with him on he used to edit some website briefly that briefly existed. And he just emailed me up and called me for lunch one day. And he's like, I want you to write for me. I met him for lunch, and I just loved him as a human being. He's old school journalist. And we sat and talked for hours over this lunch, just, telling stories, and just really adored this guy. So I wrote one story for him. The website went collapsed, whatever, but he called me up and said, I'm working for All Seasons Press now as editorial director, and we want to do a book about Tucker Carlson, and we want you to write it. And I was, totally flattered and honored, and but didn't know if Tucker would necessarily be into it. So I called him up, and at first he was like, oh, I don't, he's like, I don't read anything about myself. You know that, right? And he's like, I don't really like this kind of attention. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I didn't think he would be into it. And I was like, well, I thought it might be kind of weird because I'm a guest on your show. Should I be writing a book about you? And I said, okay, well, well, thanks anyway. And he's like, well, you know what? You're a really good writer. And he started remembering columns I'd written. I didn't even know he read my columns for The Spectator. And then he sort of talked himself into it over the course of the conversation. And he's like, yeah, great. Okay, well, let's do it, and blah, blah, blah. So, I was on my way to Maine to see him a couple weeks after that. And then, he would connect me with his wife in group chats, whenever I wanted to come and hang out with him. So that's sort of how it got off the ground. I mean, Tucker's never asked to see a word of the book. He, totally trusted me, which was, a great honor, but also very scary. You don't want to let down someone like that. But that's sort of how the book got off the ground.
That's fantastic. The editor, they say this is the idea. What's practically speaking, what sort of parameters do they set? Do they say it can't be more than, I don't know, however many words goes into a 150-page book? Do they say limit Timeframe Budget? Like, how does that work for someone who's never had any experience with that?
So you sign a contract, and then you have a deadline to deliver a manuscript, which is super short. It was January 31st. So this was less than a year to do that, and then you're just off to the races. And contractually, the book needs to be at least this many thousand. I think it was at least 60,000 words. We ended up actually cutting a lot. The book could have been a lot longer, but I wanted it to be more brief, and I wanted to be have more of that energy to it. So we ended up cutting a lot of stuff. I just started telling myself, if I can pull this off, like, I don't know how I'm going to pull this off, but if I can actually do this by January 31st, I didn't by January 31st. I was 2 months late delivering my manuscript, but it ended up being fine, which is kind of normal for these kind of contracts. But then, of course, I had submitted the manuscript in March, and I had a phone call scheduled with Tucker on the day his show was taken off the air. Because I had we were editing the manuscript, and I had 5 questions to ask him, typed up, did I get this right? Can you explain this more? And then, of course, the show was taken off the air. And then we pushed back publication, added 2 new chapters, updated it. And then, I got to talk to Tucker a couple more times to make it more relevant. But that was the journey of start to finish, getting it published.
Now, I don't know if these are industry terms: unauthorized biography, authorized biography. This is definitely, my wife said it's not an autobiography because Tucker didn't write it. This is an authorized biography or an unauthorized biography?
So it can technically be either one. I say independent biography, but authorized biography can mean either the source just agreed to it and gave you permission and let you into their life, which is what happened, or it can mean that the subject wanted a book written about himself, selected a writer, appointed this person, and had a lot of editorial control about what's in the book. So that was obviously not the case. So I say independent biography just to make that distinction. But authorized can mean either one of those things. So to sort of convey the editorial independence, I say independent biography.
Now I want to get into this, whatever did not make it past the cutting floor, if there were any hard decisions. But in making this book, writing this book, not what type of access did you have to Tucker, but what is it like? Do you tail him around indefinitely? Do you have say, I'm going to come with you for a weekend and see what's going on? How does it work in terms of actual one-on-one time or following around time, so that you can get a feel for who Tucker really is and not necessarily who the media says he is, or what you see on TV?
Yeah, so there's tons of, and I had to talk to a lot of other people too. So when I'm not with Tucker, I'm still working 7 days a week on this, talking and going to meet his father and getting to know, kids you went to high school with and things like that. With Tucker himself, it was probably, the longest I spent with him was a week at his home in Florida when I stayed in his house. Other than that, I could just go back and forth. I went to Maine and went after that long, but it was a lot of, I'm staying in his house and just following him around. Of course, give him some privacy. It's not like I'm at his, nipping at his heels all the time. But, I think the best moments were just waking up in the morning and going into the kitchen, and out he comes in his boxer shorts with a cup of coffee. And we're just sitting there, just chatting for 2 or 3 hours about anything, recorder going, getting it all on tape. That was really kind of the best parts. And then, of course, I'd follow him around for what he's doing that day, go into the studio with him, kind of sit there and just watch the show being done, and then go to dinner afterwards maybe. And his producer, Justin Wells, is with him most of the time down there. So getting to know Justin really well. And that's sort of what it's like. I like that kind of just, let me just hang out and not necessarily want to sit down and grill you over an interview. I just kind of want to watch you and observe you. And that's what I hope to capture in the book.
It certainly does. It's the anecdotes. I'm trying to think of now the expression about what he said in the book, what you said in the book, Chadwick, about telling the truth, lying being destructive and telling the truth being constructive. And I forget how you said it, but it resonated in that there's a liberation in telling the truth, where whatever you feel about Tucker Carlson, and I think it's been his revelation recently, is getting past the deceit of having to pull narratives as opposed to just speak the truth, not your truth. Maybe if you remember the line, you'll refresh my memory. But what were there any stories with anything you had to cut that you would have otherwise really wanted to include in the book?
The first one that pops in my mind was this funny story about Laura Bush's plastic surgery. And can't remember why. I think my editor was like, well, this is a little distracting, but I thought it was so hilarious. And in fact, I think in future editions, I'm going to sneak it back in there.
Laura Bush is
W's wife.
The second W's wife.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I did put a story about them having dinner together, and then there's a funny line about her plastic surgery that they cut out. There are a few like kind of.
Well, hold on.
I just love that kind of humor.
What was the line, and what was the? May I ask you what the plastic surgery was? I can imagine, but I'm not sure that I should.
Whoever they were having dinner with. Okay, let me see if I can get the exact line right. Whoever they were having dinner with, Tucker and his wife, and George W. Bush and his wife, and then the people who hosted them. It was when they were leaving. So it was, the funny line too was like these people were hosting them, but like really highfalutin, like they were somebody. And he was saying that how they really looked down on the Bushes for that unfortunate stint in public service is how they described his presidency. And it was something like when they're getting ready to leave, Laura Bush was getting into the back of the SUV and the wife said loud enough for her to hear, what's wrong with her face? Couldn't the plastic surgeon finish the job? It was something like hilarious like that.
You know what? You might have been better off not including that in the book.
It was really funny. I thought it was hilarious.
I still don't understand. Like, I have no judgment for people that decide to do it. I just don't understand why people decide to do it, because I have yet to see an example, and maybe I don't see the examples because the people who do it properly, you don't notice it. But for the amount of time it goes wrong, and my love of my childhood, Meg Ryan, it hurts me, and I don't know why people continue to do it, and then you get stuck into the black hole of continuing to do it and fixing the problems, and then it's just a disaster.
Well, yeah, or you're Joe Biden, and people think you're not the same person. That you're
Simon Cowell. Do you remember when everyone was complaining sexism because people were saying Madonna didn't look good? I was like, I remember when they're like, who the hell is Simon Cowell? What did he do? It's not about sex. It's about destroying your face and trying to look young forever.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So that's okay. Interesting. And what other one can you think of offhand, or you can't?
Oh, offhand.
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm kind of put on the spot now. I'd have to think about it.
Okay, forget it.
There were a couple of things that the lawyers wouldn't let us put in,
and that related to Dominion, I presume.
Related to some of that stuff, okay. But I'm kind of fighting to get it into the next edition. I think we will. So yeah, but I can't really talk about that, I guess.
Well, that and it's interesting because I sort of knew this. Tucker Carlson is still under contract with Fox. They're paying him not to work, right, which I presume means that he cannot get paid to do what he's doing. He would be doing it otherwise, but he's still under contract. So they didn't terminate him. They just cut his show. I think you've elaborated on the context in as much as you can, Chadwick, without getting yourself sued. Do you have any understanding, any well, I guess you do have insider knowledge. Any insights as to why they fired Tucker? Or sorry, didn't fire him. Why they paid him to
show
shut
off
up?
the air.
Yeah.
Yeah. And while they're paying him to be quiet, well, unsuccessfully. It's ideological. Like in my opinion, there's no arguing that it's not ideological. It absolutely is. Fox has still not given him a reason. The closest Fox has come was to go to the New York Times, because I guess they're good friends, and to say to them that the reason he was fired was because of a racist text message he sent, private text message, which wasn't racist at all.
It pisses me off because it was not. This is the one where he says white men don't fight like that, in the context of him reflecting on wishing ill on an Antifa boy that was getting beaten by a mob, and him saying from his own perspective, white men don't fight like that. Yeah. And he was trying to, sensitize his producer to not become the monster that you're battling. And then the New York Times took that one line and made him look racist, where, oh my goodness. I also just say framing it that way is a racist framing. Anybody who thinks that that's what he meant to say themselves think that other races, if that's what he was even going for and not talking about himself, fight like that. You're okay. So they claim that a private text message was racist, which is why they fired him. Yeah. Was the risk or the theory that was going to come to light in the context of the Dominion lawsuit, or had it already come to light?
Okay, now you make me remember that. So those those messages were part of the only reason why Tucker's messages were a part of discovery in the Dominion lawsuit was that, and this is so funny because so many liberals don't know what they're talking about, or maybe even other people believe that he was fired because of
the Dominion settlement.
Yeah, defaming Dominion. But in fact, the reason why Dominion, his private messages were a part of discovery, was because Dominion was trying to prove that reasonable people at Fox, like Tucker Carlson, did not believe that the voting machines were rigged, which of course Tucker didn't, and he pushed back against it on air.
I'll stop. Yeah, I got to stop. Oh, but I was going to say stop you there just to add that caveat. Tucker was the only one railing against Sidney Powell for never delivering the Kraken, for calling her crazy, crackpot, whatever. He was the only one at Fox not towing the Dominion vote flipping German server line. And so that's interesting. So internally, Dominion saying, look, Tucker, the smartest guy at Fox, knew this was bullshit, and nonetheless, the other people were going, and they got these text messages, which, okay, interesting. And so Fox gets this and says, but the timing of the firing also was very specific.
6 days later.
6 days after the settlement, it was very shortly after he basically said Fox is bending the knee to big pharma advertisers. It was relatively shortly there, and shortly after he said the CIA killed JFK.
Yes, and he was continuing his investigation into J6, and then of course, the war in Ukraine. He's the only voice in mainstream media who's questioning that and pointing out how money is being laundered and calling Zelensky a thug, which he believes he is. And so it's 6 days after. So, what my sources told me, which I'm out there publicly saying, and this is not news because other people had reported this, but before I even said it, but my sources had told me that it was a condition in the Dominion settlement. Dominion has obviously denied this. Fox News has denied this. But that's what I heard. And I have no reason. I believe that these people would know what's going on. If that's not the case, then it's the fact that, first of all, I could very much easily see the Murdochs, Fox management, Paul Ryan, someone on the board, or one of these companies with a controlling interest in Fox would see it to be very convenient to get rid of him right after the Dominion suit. Number one, because they realize they can keep him silent till after the next election. They don't want Trump to be the nominee. They don't like Trumpism. And Tucker Carlson, of course, the biggest megaphone for Trumpism in mainstream media and on the network. But secondly, they could use that as a tool to get everyone else in the network in line, which is like very much, from what I understand, like how Fox management works. So they get the 2-for-1 deal of shutting him up and getting him off the air. And the other benefit for them is to put the fear of God into everyone else on the network, that they better shut up, get in line. And that's obviously what's happened.
And they axed a bunch. They axed, and is in the axe sense, a lot. It was Bongino was contemporaneously with Tucker. Tucker, I don't want to forget anybody as though they're less important. I do forget who the others were, however. Who else did they cut at the same time?
I think Bongino's situation was different. I think it was a contract negotiation.
That didn't renew. Yeah. Okay.
And then he was sort of battling with them and decided to say, screw you. But Tucker's this is another reason why to me, I believe it's absolutely ideological, is that his entire production team was let go, which is completely in one fell swoop, which is not normal. I mean, this is the highest performing team of producers in cable news history. At Fox, you're not hired to work for a show. You're not hired to work for a show. You're hired to work for the network. So if your show gets taken off the air, you just get moved on to another show. Instead, they knew that Tucker's team was super, super close. They knew people were leaking stuff, especially to me, but it wasn't funny enough, it wasn't anyone who worked on Tucker's show. And I'm still talking to people who still work at Fox who send me stuff, and none of them worked on Tucker's show. So they knew that his team was very close. And I think that they wanted to purge any Tucker loyalists. And so they completely fired everyone. And that's not normally how that would go down. And
how many people were on his production team? Because he had to have at least a half dozen, a dozen?
There were about 25 people for the three shows, because he had the 2 Fox Nation shows and then the Fox the nightly show. So 9 of them quit immediately after he was let go, and then the rest of them were all fired on mid-July, July 16th or something like that. I think it was.
That's actually incredible. They were fired, they were fired and not paid to shut up. They were fired, cut, no more salary. You guys go and fend for yourselves.
Yeah, well, and they found out that they were losing their jobs in a press release that they were given the 2-week notice. So if you recall, before Fox launched its new primetime lineup, it was just a reshuffle. They had this like weird fill-in show called like Fox News Tonight that was filling the 8 o'clock slot. So the Fox had a press release that they were firing all of the remaining Tucker team members on July 16th, whatever day it was that Jesse Waters is going to take over. So that's how they found out. And not only that, they then were told, they have to keep working for 2 weeks if they want to get their severance, which they did. So,
That is provocation. That is to say, hey, you're fired, work for 2 weeks, and by the way, if you do anything retaliatory, we will crush you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. How sick is that? And then that night there was, some HR person waiting outside the control room when the show ended that night to frog march them out of the building and take their badges and whatnot and their cell phones. So that's how I went down for a team night. And they were they were great people. I mean, they were really wonderful. I had nothing but excellent experiences working with them, even, before we started working on this book.
The obvious question I've asked anybody who ever writes a book, you have a deadline, so you know when it's got to be done, but how do you know when it's done?
It's a great question.
And follow up, just to add a little neuroses if you're not already neurotic enough. Do you ever read and say, gosh darn it, why didn't I write this that way?
Oh, of course. I mean, I think, that's why you can't reread it too much, but it's definitely, reread it all the time and should have done this or that. But I'm really, my editor, Harry, is amazing. And he was like amazing guidance for this book. I mean, the way it started out was completely different than what it ended up being. And I think it was, I don't know, it's kind of a weird use of, once the show was taken off the air, I guess maybe we didn't really know how, I can't even remember now how it ended initially, but I think we were still working on the ending at the time because we were still editing and still trying to decide what the perfect ending was. And then this happened and I'm like, well, here you go. Here's how it ends. I mean, in a weird way, it's kind of like the perfect, I guess.
Well, the best ending is a new beginning because it is the best ending, and this is the first chapter of the next book of his life.
Yeah, that's exactly that's totally it, and that's what I realized after the shock settled in about his show being taken off. But I was like, well, this is like the Tucker Carlson origin story. It's not when he started at Fox. It's not when he became number one. It's when he got kicked off from Fox because now he's completely going to be completely unbound. And it ends with a new beginning. That's the ending. I mean,
phenomenal. Now, I was not going to ask. I didn't want to ask all these questions. Tell me about Tucker, and I'm not going to. The question was this, and I think I may have just forgotten it. Oh, for goodness sake! Oh, Tucker running for president.
Yeah.
Now, everybody's got to ask you. Was there anything that he indicated at any point in time in your meetings to indicate, whether directly or implicitly, that you think he might think about that?
He would never do that. I don't think. I mean, maybe I'll be wrong one day, but number one reason he would never do that is he would never subject his family to that level of scrutiny. Yeah. Like his protecting his family is the most important thing in the world to him. So that's the top reason he would never do it. Number two, a close second is he doesn't have that gene. I don't think he has that ego that says I deserve to lead you and make laws for you. It's just totally absent from him. I think his position is better as a journalist and as an observer and an interviewer than as a politician. I think he's far more in a better place there, and I think he appreciates that place. I think he enjoys that and doesn't necessarily want to be mired in politics and Washington and all that.
That is I believe a perfect answer that I think is definitive. Now that this is the next question, and it'll be the last one on Tucker. Do you have a few minutes to come over to Locals afterwards? It'll change nothing here. Do you have another 15 minutes?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. This is the last question here. Then we're going to end on Rumble, and we're going to go over to Locals, and I'm going to see if I missed any questions that are specific for you here. Am I projecting, or based on your knowledge, you've known him for years, you spent intimate time with him, does Tucker look a little more distressed and doom-pilled in the last, say, couple weeks than you've ever known throughout your relationship with him?
I don't know. I thought, at least initially, he was seeming very happy. I think if anything, he's probably feeling a little wayward without the structure that he's of this corporate life and this extremely daily routine. I think that could possibly be driving him a little crazy. In the conversations I've had with him recently, which is, mostly just like some text thing and not political or any means, he seems happy and great. But, maybe what we're seeing is he's freed a bit to maybe explore the darker side of the world that maybe felt like he couldn't explore as thoroughly on Fox. Because we're seeing some really,
Oh God. The Obama,
I'm thinking of the recent interview.
The Obama sex story. I was like, did he just say that? Do I get to repeat this? Do I get to clip this online? Am I going to get in trouble? Like, am I going to get a Secret Service on the front door? Because Yeah, I definitely not. What's the word I'm looking for? Untethered. I don't know if that's the right word. Unleashed, not unleashed. He's unhindered. I would imagine by the Fox reins, but just listening to him talk about, bringing up the assassination of Trump he's saying it out loud. I know everybody thinks it, and if people have sufficient neuroses, nobody even wants to think it for fear of putting that out in the cosmos. Talking about war with Russia. I'm wondering whether or not, with his insights, with his experience, with his connections, the reality of the world in which we live is actually much more dire than even the cynics out there like me think it is. If you had any insight on that.
I mean, only he's been around this world for so long, and he's been such a member of Washington elite circles for his entire adult life up until Trump got elected, when he was sort of excommunicated. He's a class traitor now. He's certainly bringing up some really scary scenarios, and I hope none of them come to fruition. But again, he's the only person saying what everyone's thinking, and I don't know. I guess you can. I understand the fear of putting that out into the ether, not wanting to be out there, but at the same time,
I used to
we're all thinking it.
I know that's. And I had a friend who was a psychologist and worked on cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the what is it? Not the test, but like one of the therapy sessions that they do is they say, think of the worst thing that you could possibly think of and write it down. And for the life of me, I still will never do it, even though it's totally irrational and totally superstitious. But for anybody who's not thinking that in terms of the prospect of the world, the political world in which we live, seeing the depths to which the world has already gone. This will be the last question here, and then I'm going to end it on Rumble, and we'll carry on live on Locals, and I'll see if there's any questions there for you specifically. Tucker has felt the wrath of Fox. He's felt the wrath of the world. I know that you have, to some extent, throughout your life experience, culminating perhaps with that article coming out as a conservative. It's the worst thing that you can possibly do. Have you been taking a shitload of flack now since the book? Have even your haters started to say, well, maybe you have a point, maybe have even your haters and detractors potentially started to come around, or is it more of the same from them in general?
I don't know. I don't really see a lot of that, to be honest, like at all. It's funny. I have had a couple friends, one in particular, old friends from, 2016 era, 2017, when they all left, actually come around and being like, yeah, I think you're right about everything. Actually, I drank with one of them not too long ago, who he was, it was my first book was about DEI in the workplace. And he was like, he was a bartender his whole life, and he just got a corporate job. And he was like, actually, I read your DEI book now that I work in a corporation, and you're totally right. And these people are crazy, and I'm going to vote Republican. So that was kind of amazing.
How good does that feel?
It feels great, but not even like, I guess it feels fine. It's nice. It's nice to reconnect, and I don't really hold any anger or vengeance, but I don't know if,
Can't trust you. It's like a dog that's bitten. You might be able to pat them, and they might be beautiful dogs, but you could never trust them all with your kids. No,
absolutely. Yeah. It's nice to see you again, but you're still not going to get a Christmas card. Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Everybody on Rumble, I'm going to end it on Rumble. It changes nothing from our end. I'm just going to go end live stream. Come on over to Viva Barnes Law. That's Twitter. That's not. I don't even know. Hold on. I don't know what tweet that is. Let me not send that. I know I've got a few more questions. See, all of my windows shut down when my computer crashed. Whatever, people, you know where it is. It's vivabarneslaw.locals.com. See you there. I'm going to end this on Rumble. Thank you all for being here if you're not going to come over. And Locals, I'm a-coming. Hold on a second. End the stream now, and we're good. Okay. Cool. I'm going to minimize a few windows here. We're still live. Don't do anything embarrassing.
Oh, we're still live. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can I hit my vape?
You can do whatever you want. Oh, what did I do? I did an interview. I'm such an idiot, Chadwick. I thought nothing bad happened. I just spat on my computer. Nothing bad happened, but we were still live after I thought we had ended it. And luckily I didn't just what I ordinarily do is just take my clothes, just like
stand up and you're naked, like you work for CNN.
I didn't pull a Tubin, but my goodness, it could have been worse than it was. All right, let me see here. Let's see if we got questions. No questions, just helping you buy bait. That's from Recorders. Tell him to. I'm not. Wait a minute. Hold on, what did I say here? Okay, that's not a question. Hold on, I'm going to see if there's any here. I had asked, no question. When Nick is, this was for Nick. let's see this. Okay, here. So there's no specific questions there. You said something earlier about the magazine. What was it called? Coming out or out?
Out magazine. Yeah.
Out magazine. And you said, it's probably today now a trans magazine, and it was sort of tongue-in-cheek joke. But I've been. It's not my original thought, not my original theory, but I'm thoroughly convinced that this trans movement, now that we've seen, spread like wildfire, like a contagion, literally. I just saw a tweet again confirming that now like 20% of millennials identify as whatever. And I think it's gone from what was historically like a diagnosable mental condition, and I say that with no judgment, to a trend, to a fad. I'm bi, I'm she, they, he, they. If I ever hear someone say I use the pronouns he, they, I'm going to have to express my logical discontent.
Right.
But the floating theory is that this trans movement is fundamentally misogynist on the one hand, but anti-gay on the other. And I'm interested in your perspective, like from the magazine's perspective. Do you still keep in touch with anybody there? Do they not do the traditional gays and lesbians? Do they not view what the trans movement has morphed into as an attack on current gays and lesbians and also on gay and lesbian children?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably majority of gay men, especially anyone over the age of 30, is onto this and realizes it. I mean, it's like what country performs the most sex change operations in the world? Well, Thailand, number one, but but number two, it's Iran. And the reason why Iran performs the most sex change operations is because they view it as a cure for homosexuality. There's state-funded sex change operations. So that, isn't lost on a lot of people. It's conversion therapy in the most sick way. It's mutilating people and bodies. I think that there's like basically any gay guy, any adult gay man looks at these horrible mothers who have Munchausen by proxy syndrome or something, and they're saying like, wow, if I was like a little bit of like an effeminate little boy and I liked playing dolls and whatever and playing dress up, if I had one of these mothers, she could have convinced me that I could become a girl and be a girl, and I probably would have done that. It's like everyone sees that, but the gay community, like if it even is a community, but gay people, like many minority communities, the biggest pressure is in-group pressure to not speak up and to not vote a certain way. And so even though you might privately think things and know certain things to be true, you never speak up because you're worried about how that's going to affect your social life and your sex life and whatever else. And you'll continue to vote the same way because that's just what you do. So there's like an immense amount of pressure to do that. But everyone's sick of this trans stuff. I mean, it's just gone completely overboard, and it's an absolute fad when it's not being destructive and misogynistic. And
that is a fad like the emo fad. I mean, everybody remembers emo. Everybody remembers goth. Yeah. It's a fad that is going to unfortunately literally leave scars. But I've never lived through such an era where the virtue has been weaponized so much so that I've never really understood that those who purport to be the virtuous are actually the tyrants.
They made fashion into a civil rights movement. It's the strangest thing in the world, and it's this like 20% of Gen Z identifying as LGBTQ plus. It's all in the Q plus,
Well, it's an explorative sexual orientation, but it's now been construed as and with the what's the word when someone helps you with an unhealthy addiction?
Enablers.
It's been enabled by the government who've basically legislated a fad. I mean, especially in Canada, a fad, something that is basically sexual orientation into an identity and a protected class, and with all that entails in terms of bastardizing laws that prohibit conversion therapy by mandating conversion therapy. It's a crazy paradox. Okay, now I got some questions here that I was looking for in locals. This is a question for you, Chadwick. My question is Moore getting a lot of interviews from people interested in his book? I'd bet since Tucker Carlson is the enemy of the idiots who work for propaganda mafia, lots of controlled media don't want to give him a platform.
Oh yeah, we've gotten like no mainstream media on this book attention. The Daily Mail has done some stories, some other places, but I was banned from Fox News within 2 hours of us announcing the book.
What does that look like? How do they notify you? Is it unwritten or is it actually written?
Well, it is written somewhere. It's called the Do Not Book List, and it is a very extensive list of people who are not allowed on Fox News, and everyone knows about this list. But for what happened to me, so I was a regular on Greg Gutfeld's show, which was I was on once a month, usually the last week of the month. So it was like a pretty regular thing. I knew it was coming up. And I was already booked to be on May 31st it was. And then we announced the book a few days before that and, got an email kicking me off. And then I was on a couple other Fox shows. They, of course, canceled those upcoming appearances. And then Greg Gutfeld blocked me on Twitter, which was like so weird and bizarre just after this book. So, I bet like if you're like, you can't say Tucker's name on air at Fox. You can't, and anyone who's affiliated with him is totally banned. You cannot say his name on air. That directive went out the day his show was taken off the air. Someone at Fox told me that, like, we can't say his name. No show can say his name. But that's like part of the course with Fox is they pretend anyone who used to work there, whether they left on good terms or bad terms or whatever, Fox completely unpersons them. Like they pretend they never existed. You'll look at like the Five not too long ago did this kind of they're celebrating like their 5-year anniversary or 10-year anniversary or something. They did this kind of like memory reel or whatever they do. And they literally scrubbed people out like Eric Bolling, who founded the show, who are no longer at the network. And like, that Stalin-esque way you delete people from photographs.
I've got to ask for some details on this. How do they make known this policy to not mention Tucker Carlson's name?
It was a memo that went out to all the producers the day after his show was taken off the air. So someone on a different show told me that. And then, of course, you watch Fox. So you can do, people who work there have showed me this. You can search. They have access to this database where you can search the transcripts, every transcript of every Fox show for like words. And so they showed me like Tucker. And it's like one time since, and it was somebody accidentally saying it one time since April 24th.
Or they might have been just talking about someone who was tucking their, I don't know, tucking.
Yeah. They're talking about swimsuits at Target, maybe.
I've got another running theory. High school never ends. It just gets bigger and more and fancier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true as well. Yeah.
The do not book list or the do not book. Have you ever seen it?
No, I would like to. I mean, I know names that are on it, like Ann Coulter, and I mean, you can think of tons. Anyone who's really popular on the right who's never been on Fox is on that list for some reason. And sometimes, from what I understand, from what people tell me, it could be like, they said something, they tweeted something controversial once, or it could be maybe just someone doesn't like them, like there's a personal beef.
Fox News is no better than CNN, with the except to the fact that they cover some articles, some news. Oh my God, I didn't realize it was this bad. Gutfeld.
Oh yeah, I've known about this list forever, and I remember that because there were times when like I wouldn't be booked for a couple months. And people would be like, oh, it's not like they do not book lists. Sometimes it's not permanent. You're on it for like a couple months because you said something controversial, so they wanted to calm down.
You're on timeout.
And then you're welcome back on, like you're then off the list, and then you're on the list. But then some people are like definitely on it like permanently. And I mean, now I'm obviously on it permanently, which is like totally fine. Who cares? But
that is to say then, and I don't want to put anybody else on the spot, Jesse Waters and the other free speakers on the show. They know not to say Tucker's name. Despite whatever loyalty or friendship they may have had, they have to play by this if they want to keep their jobs at Fox. Part of me wants to judge them for being complicit in this, but I know that that's not fair.
Yeah, they're like, well, it's funny. It's interesting because Tucker did an interview with Adam Carolla recently, and he actually kind of addresses this exact thing. I think he's probably perhaps specifically talking about his old colleagues. He says that like, these people, these anchors, like they're constantly told by management that they're worthless, that they're so easily replaceable. And for the most part, they are all completely replaceable and forgettable. Not everyone, but most of them. And so he's just like, it's this mentality these people have to just not step out of line and that, they're nothing without the network. They need the network. And so they just fall into line and they're all become company men at the end of the day. And I guess in a way, I mean, when you're making that kind of money, like, I don't know. What would we all do in that situation? Of course, there's another part of me that thinks like, well, how much money is enough? Maybe it is time you stand up for something you believe in.
I mean, especially how much money is enough, but also how do you affect change if you never attempt to affect change? I mean, but then also just that I would be ready just to like, I am ready. I don't even share Fox News articles anymore. I just go find another source that has the same story.
Me too.
Then the other question that I had was, Gutfeld blocked you. Mm-hmm. I don't think you said anything bad about Gutfeld. Even if it were bad, I don't think you even said anything that could be misconstrued as insulting in the book. Did you mention Gutfeld in the book?
No, I thought I was quite nice about Fox News in the book, at least in the early chapters, and you read it.
Nicer than you deserved, than you ought to have been, but I could understand.
Probably. No, I said nothing. Greg's name, I don't think even comes up in the book, except maybe just referentially, not anything like that. No, I tweeted that his show had taken me off the air because of the book after we announced it, which is fact. Not him personally, because I know it wasn't him personally. I know it was the network, and I know he wouldn't.
He confirmed it by blocking.
And to his credit, I know that he is Team Tucker, and that drives him insane. And so I never was like, Greg is a bad person. Well, now I have different opinions of him, but no, but I was kicked off the show, not him. But that was enough for him to. He's blocked. He's like an insane blocker, though. I found out because like people with like 20 followers on Twitter get blocked by him. He's one of those people that blocks everyone. Do
you know if the folks at Fox, do they manage their own accounts, or do they have handlers that manage their accounts, and do they use block lists maybe?
I think it depends on the individual. It seems pretty clear that Greg runs his own Twitter account. Well, there's the show's account, and then there's his personal account. Mm-hmm. I think looking at the tweets, it's pretty clear that's him. Well, I know it's him because he would DM me from that account. But okay. So I think it just depends on the personality.
He went from DMing you to blocking you. That's mature, Greg. I'm talking to you, Gutfeld. If you watch this afterwards,
exactly. That was hurtful. I thought we were friends, Greg.
Wow. Some Texas transplant in our locals community says, I heard you on the radio yesterday. Interesting. He's interesting. Be sure to ask about Amazon shadow banning the book. First of all, I don't want to ask. Is the book being received well despite the MSM propagandist blackout?
Yeah, it is. What that person's talking about was, this was like, you want to go down the rabbit hole on this stuff. So week one sales. So you have a book, you announce pre-order. We announced pre-order in May, and the way this works is the reason why publishers have pre-orders is you rack up all these orders. And then on the release date, which for us was August 1st, all those orders ship, and then they count as week one sales. So you have a long pre-order period, and then week one sales that you hope is a big number because that counts towards the bestseller list, which is not just a vanity metric. That's a metric for, retailers look at those lists and decide what to buy, blah, blah, blah. So over 60% of books in the US are sold through Amazon. That's like by far the majority of where all the pre-orders come from and book sale orders. And what happened was Amazon had, first of all, when people were pre-ordering, they're getting notifications that their orders being canceled for no reason. They're getting notifications that they had to log in on their desktop, not the app or their phone, and to actively confirm they still want this, or it would be automatically canceled. There were times when you just couldn't pre-order at all on Amazon. So all these shenanigans were leading up to August 1st. Amazon had like 8,000 books on hand because we know we shipped them. We know how many books they have. They had 8,000 books on hand August 1st. Within like 2 hours of the book going live for sale, they were sold out on the website. You couldn't order the book. Amazon placed another order for 5,000 copies. Less than a week later, they were sold out again. So week one, book sales come out, and according to the Book Scam, which is a company retailers report to track bestsellers, the book only sold 3,000 copies. So they got the headline like total. So we're looking at this and we're like, that would only make sense if Amazon reported 0 sales, which to me, that's what it looks like happened. The point of that, of course, was they got their headline. The liberal media and Fox News Media Relations Department got their headline, which was Tucker book bombs, ha ha ha. And it's not about me. Like, nobody cares about me. It's about looking like Tucker has no power without mainstream media and that nobody cares about it. Like, that was the whole point.
In terms of the tactic, no, but that's got it. It's the culmination of years of your life, and to either have it fucked with or to have it lied about. It is understandably vexatious to the soul, and then the underlying reason, you want to make it look like nobody's interested in Tucker Carlson's life, which people should read the book. Going back to his grandfather, his upbringing, it is very interesting, and it's a damn easy listen, which I very much like. Okay, so did they rectify it, or did you get the accurate numbers after the headlines?
Oh, well, they get the headlines they want from the Guardian and Fox News Media Relations Department and Mediaite and all these liberal sources, and then the next week, number 3 bestseller and New York Times bestseller. So the next week we look and look, Amazon suddenly reported 14,000 books were sold. How amazing is that? But not the first week. Okay, interesting. So that's what happened with that. But So the book's, I mean, it's being received really well. It means a lot to me that so many people are enjoying it. Of course, it's really great. And I don't really care about the vanity metric except for the fact that you're right. It's like fucking with the truth and fucking with my life and even Tucker's reputation. Thankfully, so my publishing company, All Seasons, we have lawyers looking into it. They're putting together a file. If they find that what we think happened, we're making a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. We're talking to members of Congress who are on the Energy and Commerce Committee, so let them know what's going on. Mainly not just for us, but because we don't want, we're just sick of this bullshit. Like, it's big tech companies fucking with conservative authors and publishers. So I love that my publishing company wants to make a stink about it, and they want to stand up for all conservative authors to see that Amazon, maybe won't feel free to do this again. If Amazon did in fact do this and it was intentional. So that's, to be determined, but they're looking into it.
Yeah, well, once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, and 3 times is enemy action. And this is well beyond 3 times. Chadwick, what we're going to do now, we're going to end it, and then I'll just say our proper goodbyes afterwards. When I put this all on the internet, it's going to include this part at the end so people will know where to find you, but the links are already there. Chadwick_Moore with an E on Twitter. Where else? What other platforms and where else can people find you?
I'm most active on Twitter. So you can find me there. You can go to tuckerthebook.com if you want links to where to buy it and more information about it. And then my website is chadwickmoore.com. And you can look up my stuff in The Spectator as well.
Okay, fantastic. This is amazing. Thank you very much. The book was great. The book, it's fantastic. And I'm going to have to go back. When I read books on paper, I could highlight the sections that I know I wanted to go back to afterwards. And on audiobook, I can't exactly, unless they have this, I haven't looked, but like timestamp things. It's got great insights, and your assessment of Tucker's perspective of the world, it's fantastic. It will be value added to everybody out there. So the link to the book is already in the pinned comment in the description. Chadwick, we should do this again.
Absolutely, man. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stick around. We'll say our proper guys. Everyone on Locals, see you later. Everyone on the interwebs, see you soon.